up here. Good morning, Facebook. Here we go. I am Justin Dunaway, lead faculty with the Institute of Clinical Excellence. I teach our spinal thrust manipulation and our persistent pain courses, and I'm super excited to talk about today's topic, breath work. I'm going to sort of focus on just kind of breath work in general and how I use it most often. But if you want to deep dive into the specific persistent pain population, our next persistent pain cohort starts October 11th, if you're interested in that. There's a few slots left. But let's dive into today's topic, breath work. For me, it's really thinking about what is our intended stimulus. What are we after when we do the breath work? There's lots of cool benefits with working with people in their breathing. You see tons of different techniques out there. You hear about box breathing and 4-7-8 and Wim Hof and Periana and all the different types out there. So how do you know which to do? How long do you hold them? How do you do dosage? That's what I want to talk about. So when people ask me, what breath stuff do you do with patients? My question always is, well, what's your intended stimulus? What is your target? What does your patient need? Do different breathing techniques do different things? How do we dose them? And most importantly, how do we know if the technique we chose was appropriate for the patient and if it's actually achieving the stimulus we're after? We think about this really well with exercise, right? If I said, what exercise do you like to do with your patient? You're going to say, well, what does the patient need? What is the patient after? What is my intended stimulus? Am I after building strength? Endurance, hypertrophy, power, mobility. What is the thing I'm after? Once I know my intended stimulus and understand how I can pick specific exercises with specific dosages to achieve those stimulus, I can match the stimulus to the patient, and I've got really good objective ways to measure that. Right? We all understand that, if my goal is quadricep power, and I build that over 6 weeks with a patient, it doesn't make sense that my benchmark would be a 10K run, right? We would have a measure that's designed to measure quadriceps power. So I want to take those same concepts, but apply them to breath work. So when I think about breathing, I think about three, to me, I want to talk about the three stimuli that I'm after the most in the clinic. Now I realize there's a lot of different breathing techniques. There's a lot of different ways we can use breathing. There's a lot of different settings, from, like intra-abdominal pressure control or, there's lots of different ways to use it. But I'm going to go after kind of the three things that I think about most in the clinic with my patient population. And it looks like this. From a breathwork perspective, the stuff that I'm after the most is 1, calming the central nervous system, 2, distraction, or 3, carbon dioxide CO2 tolerance. And I think that there's a couple different techniques that target those really, really well, and then a couple different comparable measures that make sense for those specific targets. So let's break each of those down. The first one, thinking about calming the central nervous system. To me, I'm thinking about the patient that has a ton of pain, probably persistent, centrally dominant pain patient, high severity, high irritability, everything hurts, nothing helps. They're super flared up. They're just the energy in the room says, I just need to bring this patient down a little bit. So I start with even breathing is what I call it. But these are just even, I'm thinking about timing. I'm not worried about how long we're holding breath. This is just an even in and even out. And we can pick the seconds based on patient tolerance, right? Based on the more ramped up the patient is, the less tolerance they have for breath holding and slow exhalation. So we might start with 3 seconds in, 3 seconds out, and just nice and calmly work in and out, nice and even. Might start with 2 to 5 minutes, but really the goal is just to bring down the central nervous system. We know that we can tap into parasympathetic activity through nice, slow exhalation. This is also a nice technique that you can do in the clinic. This is a nice thing that we can send the patient home with to use throughout the day to really just start to get a bunch of doses of calming the central nervous system, activating the parasympathetic nervous system. Now, there's another technique that's nice for in-the-moment calming of the nervous system, like if the patient feels themselves ramping up. I first heard about this on the Human Lab podcast. There's some cool research out about it, but it's called the physiologic sigh. Joe, a while back, did one talking about the physiologic sigh and the side stitch cramp, but it's just 2 quick in-breaths followed by a long out-breath, and that just it's kind of a nice jolt to your parasympathetic nervous system. You can knock out 2 or 3 of those in a row, but it's a really nice like rescue technique for nervous system ramp up. So thinking about even breathing and the physiologic sigh is ways to decrease the central nervous system. But how do you know if you're actually doing that? You've got to have solid comparable measures. What I love for comparable measures for calming the nervous system is my first go-to is pain pressure threshold. Patient comes in, I get my pain pressure threshold odometer, I measure their pain pressure threshold. It might be 1 pound in the region we're looking at. We do 2 to 5 minutes. It's just nice, slow, even breathing. Recheck pain pressure threshold. You see a significant increase. I love that. It shows the patient that there's a nervous system issue, and it shows the patient that it's working. We get a little bit of buy-in. If the patient has a wearable, we can look at heart rate in the moment. And then we can look at resting heart rate at night and heart rate variability over time to see if we're making larger changes in the nervous system throughout the day, throughout the week, things like that. So pain pressure threshold, heart rate variability, main comparables for calming the central nervous system. Number 2, distraction. Different stimulus, different goals here. For this, I think about the patient that's a little bit more, maybe there's a little bit more anxiety on board. Maybe we've got a bit of a ruminating personality. Maybe their mind's all over the place. Maybe they're always constantly checking in on their symptoms, or there's a lot of fear-avoidant behavior, that kind of stuff. The brain is an absolutely terrible multitasker. So what I love to do is think about using breathing, because again, it's a nice way to calm the system, but as a cognitive task to distract them from all the other stuff their brain is doing. So we can weave in a little bit of mindfulness work here, but really the idea is, how do I take something very simple, get the patient to focus on it, and then build the cognitive load of that task to distract them from the other things. So here, I don't worry about breath holds. I don't worry about how long we're inhaling. Timing doesn't matter at all here. Here, we just breathe, nice and easy. Just breathe in, breathe out, at your own pace, nice and comfortable. And what I want you to do is count each breath. Inhale is 1, exhale is 2, inhale is 3, exhale is 4. Work your way to 10. Once you get to 10, reset, and we'll start counting again. As they start working on this, then we'll start to pull a little mindfulness in. Now, what I want you to notice is as you're counting, you probably find yourself, you get a bit distracted. Your mind wanders. You go to different places. You might check in on what's going on with your back. You might check in with work or what's going on the rest of the day, or what some things that are going on at home or whatever. And that's totally normal. In a non-judgmental way, I just want you to note that distraction and then bring your mind back to the counting. If you've lost where you were, again, that's totally normal. Just start back at 1, build yourself back up. As they start to work on that, now we can increase the cognitive load of the tasking. Now I don't want you to just count the numbers. I want you to visualize each number as you count it. I want you to see 1, see 2 in your mind. Watch those numbers take shape. And as they work on that, maybe we can increase it a little more. Now I want you to really focus in on the quality of those numbers. Are the lines curved? Are they block letters? How big or small is the number in your mind? What color is it? And we can start to pull more and more cognitive load into the task, making it more and more distracting. The other thing I like to do with this kind of stuff is I couple it with breathing. So maybe we do, or couple it with movement. So maybe they've got a chronic shoulder pain, or maybe a CRPS type patient, or there's a lot of fear avoidance of moving specific body parts in different ways. So we work on our breathing, we're getting our counting down, we're really distracted. Now I say, okay, cool. Now take a nice deep breath. And with each breath, I want you to slowly flex your shoulders, and then slowly, as you exhale, bring them back down. As you inhale, raise your arms. As you exhale, bring them back down. So again, the breathing has taken up a fair amount of cognitive load, and we can start to move into pieces of fearful tasks. I love this. So from a how do we know this is working perspective, with this one, I really like, in the short term, I love to compare this against a movement that we're trying to build great exposure against. We can also look at pain, pressure, threshold, and heart rate here. Anytime we're relaxed and breathing, those things are going to change. But what I'm after here in the short term is improving fearful movement. What I'm after in the long term is improving rumination or anxiety. So what I love from a measure perspective there is either having a baseline of the pain catastrophizing scale, because it has a rumination subscale, and I love to see that drop over time. Or we could use the GAD-7, the Generalized Anxiety Disorder 7 scale. Either of those are really nice ways to look at some of the things that a good mindfulness practice will change over time. The last target is CO2 tolerance. If you happen to read the new book out by James Nestor called Breathe, they talk a lot about CO2 tolerance, about sort of what it means and how poor CO2 tolerance is kind of a marker of our system's inability to handle stress, or how stressed out we already are. And this technique to build CO2 tolerance is really all about timing. This is where we really start to mess with our inhalation, our exhalation, and our hold variables. And you'll see this attack really three, but from a breathing perspective, we'll see it attack two different ways. You see even hold stuff, so like box breathing. So we breathe in for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, exhale for 4 seconds, inhale for 4 seconds. Breathe in for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4. So you've got like a nice even all the way through. Or this is where you see techniques like 4-7-8 breathing. Breathe in for 4, hold for 7, exhale for 8. Really what we're doing is we're separating the amount of time between bringing in oxygen and offloading carbon dioxide. So the longer those two intervals are apart, the more you're giving great exposure to building up of CO2 tolerance in your system. The better you get at that, the better you handle some stressors that come up through your body metabolically. Really another way to tackle CO2 tolerance, and this is kind of for your more higher level patients, is through nasal breathing techniques. So really trying to do all your inhalation and exhalation through your nose. One, it's much better for you. There's so much cool science here in that James Nestor book, but this is really difficult to do specifically during physical activity. So things that you can do is maybe if you're going for a run, or you're on the stationary bike, or you're doing exercise in the gym or whatever, you can set up intervals where for the next 30 seconds, I'm just going to breathe in through my nose, out through my nose, nothing else, as I'm working hard. Over time, I can build up that interval and try to get work as long as I can, just breathing solely through my nose. So how do we get our baseline measure for CO2 tolerance and see if this is changing over time? There's actually a really nice test called the CO2 tolerance test, where you just instruct the patient. It's super easy. It's free. You just instruct the patient to take a couple nice, easy, full breaths, depending on where you read it. Sometimes it's 3, sometimes it's 4, but nice, easy, full breaths. And on that last full breath, all you do is exhale as slowly as you can and as long as you can, and you time it. And then the test is over when either you run out of air or you feel like you need to inhale. If you hop on Google and type Shift Adapt CO2 tolerance test, that website's got a really nice description of how to perform the test, and it's got a list of the different norms, how long you should be able to hold it for, and what each of these breath hold times mean. If your CO2 tolerance is really poor, this is a nice thing to work on. So these are my 3 main targets when I'm thinking about breath work. What is my stimulus for the patient, and how do I use these things in practice? Now what I want to say is that there is a fair amount of overlap here when we think about pain, pressure, threshold, heart rate variability, that kind of stuff. But I think there's a lot of value in thinking about what it is I'm after with my patient in the moment, and trying to match the treatment to the patient, and then making sure that we have the right comparable measure so that we can demonstrate change to the patient so they really understand the value of this powerful intervention. The other thing I want to say is rarely do I only work on one thing at a time. I tend to, like if I'm working with this with a patient or with myself, we'll set a timer, maybe we're going to work on this for 5-6 minutes. I might jump back and forth. I might start with a little bit of a little bit of distraction work, and then move into some CNS decreasing work, then move back into some distraction, or really whatever it is the patient needs. But I might tackle a couple things at the same time and just kind of slowly vacillate between the two techniques. I want to say that I think there's a lot of value in messing with this stuff yourself. I play a lot with this personally, some meditation work, some breath work. One, I think it's hugely valuable for our own nervous systems. We all live in a pretty ramped up world. But I also think that if this is a thing that we're going to work on with the patients, it's important to play with some of this stuff. It's important to do some of the distraction breathing, see how easily our minds travel, see some of the barriers of getting all the way from 0 to 10, see some of the difficulty with some of these breath hold techniques, how ramped up we can get, how difficult some of this stuff is. The more we play with it, the better we are at dosing this stuff appropriately for our patients, because we actually know what these things feel like. But the better we get at explaining these things to the patient, the better we get at sort of developing our script, the better we get at running through exactly how we're going to take the patient through this practice as they lay on our table, and the better we get at instructing them on how they're going to do this on their own. So I think there's a ton of value in us playing with it, being creative, mix and match, and really making sure that we dial it into the right comparable measures. So at the end of the day, quick wrap up. When I think about breathing, clinically, or me personally, there's three main targets. I'm looking at calming the central nervous system. I'm looking at distracting from ruminating thoughts and really trying to be in the moment and shut down all other stimuli and just focus on the one thing I'm in right now. And then there's CO2 tolerance, really building my nervous system's ability to tolerate CO2 through different breath hold techniques. Mix and match these things. And the most important thing is, at the end of the day, any treatment you do should have an intended stimulus. Like, I should pick a thing based on the specific target I'm after, and I must have a comparable measure that makes sense with my target. All right, team. 16 minutes, not bad at all. That's all I've got on breathing for today. I would love to hear how this is going. If you're practicing with it now, or if you're using this with your patients, throw some thoughts in the chat. And at the end of the day, take a nice deep breath, let it out nice and slow, and just breathe. Have an awesome day in clinic, everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to the PT on Ice Daily Show. If you enjoyed this content, head on over to iTunes and leave us a review. And be sure to check us out on Facebook and Instagram at the Institute of Clinical Excellence. If you're interested in getting plugged into more ICE content on a weekly basis while earning CEUs from home, check out our virtual ICE online mentorship program at ptonice.com. While you're there, sign up for our Hump Day Hustling newsletter for a free email every Wednesday morning with our top 5 research articles and social media posts that we think are worth reading. Head over to ptonice.com and scroll to the bottom of the page to sign up.